agenda today at the exact same time as the moment of silence for 9/11 in New York City. I'm not sure if that means I'm supposed to be silent or if I am supposed to give a presentation, but I do think we should pay our respects to those who have fallen on 9/11 just 12 years ago. So as David said, I will introduce Marcus Wilson after I'm through with my presentation, and then I'm going to turn the baton to Marcus to introduce our other two panelists as he finishes his part of the presentation. So my passion for real-world evidence and the work that I'm doing at AstraZeneca and with HealthCore stems from really a frustration I had on the health plan and pharmacy benefit management side of the business, trying to make better healthcare decisions for our members for 26 plus years in multiple P&T committee settings, pharmacy and therapeutics committee decision-making processes, and formula decision-making processes. And it stems from the fact that when you're making decisions about coverage for millions of Americans, you want to make the right healthcare decision, particularly if you're a clinician that comes from the heart of wanting to do the right thing for patient outcomes, which is where my heart has always been since I became a clinical pharmacist. And it is the reason I became a clinical pharmacist. The reason that it's frustrating for healthcare decision makers is that they don't have all the data needed at the time they need to make the healthcare decision. And that's not just for payers, it also goes for providers and also for patients who have to make decisions with their doctors with the best evidence at hand. And if you just use clinical trial data from drugs and devices and other types of products and therapies and interventions, you don't necessarily have all the right data. So that is why we need real-world evidence to help inform, really, beyond just what the clinical trial phase of drugs and devices and technologies can show us. And it's also real-world evidence helps us fill the gap in care of understanding what's going on with the intensifying burden of chronic disease in this country. You'll notice that it's 5% of the population makes up half of the U.S. healthcare costs. That's an incredible number. It's a growing issue around burden of disease in that chronic disease will affect over half of all Americans by 2030. And 75% of total healthcare costs go towards treating chronic disease. And that is why you're seeing a shift in this country, along with all of the Affordable Care Act changes, from activity to outcomes. So you're seeing doctors and patients and others wanting to move into better insights for better quality of care, better outcomes, and doctors and hospital systems and IDNs will be, integrated delivery networks will be reimbursed based upon how well they do on improving patient outcomes and managing total cost of care, not just unit cost. And real-world evidence helps us get there by helping to create a patient 360 view. So what we've been working on for the past couple of years with HealthCore and AstraZeneca and our initiative in various spots around the country, and you'll hear some of the work that we're doing with Cleveland Clinic later from Dr. Cashone, is actually working to combine clinical data sets within hospitals, integrated delivery networks, and large provider groups with claims data sets to create a longitudinal patient record, to give a longer term and broader and deeper view of the patient, to give better insights into how we can improve quality and cost of care. And you might have seen a lot of press over the past several years about big data. There's a lot of people talking about big data, but it's not really about big data because big data can be solid, but it's very limited in that it can be either like claims or clinical information, but kind of siloed and not really giving you the full patient view. So what we like to talk about is deep data, where you have not only a high volume of data, but you have the right sources of data combined to be able to make the right assessment around what's going on around quality and cost of care. And that is why you'll see what we talk about later is we're combining, in some cases, electronic medical record data, but in the case of Cleveland Clinic, it is more registry data. And there's applications for real-world evidence type work, not only for patients in identifying unmet medical needs, but also for IDNs and hospitals for improving quality and cost of care, for payers around the analysis of payment models and risk-based contracts, outcomes-based agreements, and then also for pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca. And no, I'm not Eli Lilly. but I have friends at Eli Lilly, so I'm friendly with Eli Lilly. We do a number of different types of analyses using not just claims data, but a variety of different types of data sets to help us inform not only our pipeline, but also about the value of our medicines once we bring those products to market so that they're used for the right patient at the right time. So this is just a pictorial of how we're utilizing the real-world evidence capability and the function and the data sets that we've acquired through HealthCore and other partnerships globally to inform our product pipeline, our research. We've actually utilized this capability and the data sets to inform on unmet medical need, to actually purchase a product and a company. And that really helps us understand where we actually can deliver value to the healthcare system. We've used it, you'll see in just a minute, with products on the market to do comparative effectiveness research, where we're looking at real-life comparative outcomes of our products against other products in the market. And we've used it also in drug development while we're in building clinical and appropriate endpoints into our phase 3 and 3B trials so that by the time we come to market, we have the right endpoints available for doctors and patients to make better decisions about where and how to use our products. So this is an example study, and then I'll actually turn this back over to Marcus. This is a study that compared one of our products in asthma patients, so it's budesonide and formoterol, compared to the leading agent in the class, fluticasone salmeterol, and just looking at really whether or not, number one, primary objective, was there a difference in exacerbations of over 1 year post-initiation, and then secondary outcome being, was there a difference in healthcare resource utilization between the agents? So this was actually presented, the full study was presented at Quad AI, which is the Allergy Immunology Conference, if you're not aware of it. It is also published in the primary literature, and it's available for full publication review and manuscript review. If you see, there was a statistically relevant difference in exacerbation rates between the two products. And in addition, we did see a lower rate of not only exacerbations, but also around utilization. And so there may be some differences here. You have to look at, this is a retrospective analysis, so you have to be very careful how you interpret the data. But it could have been some oral corticosteroid differences in utilization between patient populations that may have changed the way that the products performed in exacerbation. It could have been fewer emergency room visits that changed healthcare resource utilization. So you have to be really careful how you interpret the data. But there was a statistically relevant difference in the products, which actually took our brand team by surprise, and nicely so. So before I turn this over to Marcus, I want to say a couple of words about Marcus. One, if you didn't know this, Marcus and I actually started working on real-world evidence and observational studies back in the late 90s, when on the back of a napkin on an airplane, we met each other and started sketching out what we might do together. So that is the length of our friendship and partnership. Marcus has been doing laudable work in the observational and real-world evidence area for decades. He has a passion for doing the right thing for patients, and he is, beyond just being the president of HealthCore, has contributed his knowledge and expertise and the work that he's bringing to the table with a number of different governmental agencies, including helping to create the FDA's Mini Safety Sentinel system. In addition, he now chairs the Innovations on Evidence Medicines Development group and steering committee, and he has contributed to a number of other local in Indiana as well as national organizations and the work that they're doing to improve patient care in the United States. So, Marcus, it's all yours.
All right, I was warned ahead of time not to hit the button that you typically use for pointer, or it would exit us out of the presentation. So I'll do my best not to do that. So thank you, Brian, for the introduction. The opening remarks by David also will come into play as we go through this presentation today, because I think the work that BioCrossroads has done over the years has been very, very thought-leading work, and I think it's something that's echoed not only for Indiana, but it's also echoed across the country. So I'm very proud of what BioCrossroads stands for and the work that they've done as well. So thank you. So Brian talked a little bit about our collaboration, but what we did 3 years ago when we set out to do what we call the real-world evidence collaboration was really try to fix a big hole we saw in the system. And one of those holes I'll illustrate with some of my favorite slides we'll talk about today. But in doing this, and I think as we get further into discussion and some of the work that IHI has done, as well as some of the work that Cleveland Clinic has done, you'll realize it's not so easy. To create that 360-degree view is exceptionally difficult. Most of the work that we've done so far is looking at the very nascent technologies that will help us do the integration of the data. And again, and so as we've begun to learn how well the technologies work, how to use the data, what we're now beginning to do is expand our collaboration. We're bringing in new partners, and as well as we're increasing the amount of work we're running through the partnership, and beyond just using the unidimensional data. And I'll talk about that. The point that Brian made about big data versus deep data is one of the most important takeaways I think you can have from today. And I'll give you a great example as to why that's the case in just a second. This is by far my favorite slide, and I show it every time I present. I was at a big strategy meeting at WellPoint yesterday, and the first thing I did was talk about this because it is one of my favorite slides, and it is something we can't lose sight of. I'm a clinical pharmacist as well, and I started my career embedded in a group practice of 16 physicians, and all I did day in and day out was help these two individuals make better decisions, period. That was my job, giving them the right information so they can make better decisions. Because at the end of the day, that's where the rubber meets the road. So all the good work that's done, all the mistakes that are made, all the advances we make, all of that is for these two individuals here. So let's talk for a moment about what real-world evidence is and why is it important. And I want to compare that to the critically important clinical trial process. So as we think about what real-world evidence is, with this concept, we call this the cone of evidence slide. And what this slide represents is, if you look on the far left-hand side of the slide, we start at a point in time when we begin the process of understanding a very new product, at the point of conceptualization, and then beginning to expose that product to different populations. And what you see is gradually, as we get more and more familiar with the product during the drug development process, we gradually expose that to an increasing number of patients. Different patients, higher volumes of patients. As we're getting more and more comfortable with its safety, then ultimately how well it works, we gradually expand out that cone of evidence until we get to the point to where those products that survive, then at that point in time, go through the FDA and in the United States and get approval. So once the product's approved, we continue to develop evidence on it, and that's what's represented sort of the inside cone. But the challenge we run into is that because we don't restrict the use of the medicines to just those patients that we've studied it on or just those indications, then we wind up with utilization of the product being far beyond the evidence. And so what happens in that situation is we wind up with patients exposed to the product where we don't know if it's safe or not, and we don't know if it works or not. And so those are both of those have very profound implications. So what this slide begins to tell you is not only that we're talking about things like off-label indications, but we're looking at the types of patients that were exposed. So if we think about a clinical trial, by the time a product hits the market, we've had thousands of patients generally that have been exposed to a product, if we're lucky. When you get to the right-hand side of this, there are often millions of patients exposed to the product of very different types of makeup. The things we're talking about, differences in age. So typically when you study a product, you're looking at the patients in a very narrow age range. Pediatrics and the elderly are often underrepresented in terms of what our evidence is when it comes to market. Different races, ethnicities, gender have a profound impact on outcomes in many cases, comorbid conditions, other drugs you're taking at the same time can really change the outcomes. The food you eat can change the outcomes, and it's often not well studied in clinical trials. So in varying levels of compliance. The challenge is, as Brian talked about before in his previous life, it's when you get into a world of a policymaker or a prescriber or as a patient, these factors are critically important to informing your decisions. Or should I be taking this product or should I not? Should I prescribe this product or should I not? Should I cover this product or should I not? And very much of that is it depends. It depends on does the patient or the population that's impacted by your decision fit inside the cone or outside the cone. If it's inside the cone, it can tell you whether you should or shouldn't because you know whether or not you know what you should do. If it's outside of that, you often don't know. So and it's okay to have that, but for us, real-world evidence is about understanding outside of the cone and accelerating the expansion of that center cone. So you often hear it referred to, as David said, as comparative effectiveness research, and the government has now formed the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, PCORI, which is very much bent on helping to fill that gap as well. So there's a big initiative, not just in the U.S., but globally, to now begin to understand that. The pharmaceutical industry, and as represented not only by AstraZeneca, but many others, have been also taking notice of that, saying, look, we need to understand that as well. Because as we're innovating, as we're bringing products to market, we want to make sure we're understanding what that world is like, and we're bringing value to the patients and to the system as a whole in doing that, and able to demonstrate that value. So I think filling the gap is essential, and it's what many of us have been working on for many years. Not an easy thing to do. So here's another one of my favorite slides. So Brian mentioned the word sort of having big data, but it being often siloed data. And what this slide is a representation of is work that we've done early on with a group up in just outside of New York City, where we integrated data together on about 22,000 patients. And the idea is when we put their electronic medical record data together with our Blue Cross Blue Shield data to really try to understand better about what was going on with those patients. And one of the first things we looked at is we said, well, if we put those together, what's the incremental lift we get on measuring something as simple as what we call HEDIS. Now, HEDIS is what the health plans typically use to judge quality. And so you can tell if a health plan is doing well or not well based on HEDIS measures. They're generally process measures, and they're generally based upon claims data. In some cases, they go to chart. All these 6 measures on these diabetic populations, and I included a very small fraction of them here, all 6 of these are all on diabetic patients, and they generally require us to go to chart. So what we were trying to determine is, well, if we integrate the data together, does that give us a good assessment of the chart electronically without having to go manually abstract the data and put it together? It makes sense. And we showed, see the things in the green, it actually did show that we would get incremental lift by having that integration. That's not the story. That you would expect. What really, really worried us was some of the numbers in the bottom of the page. Not down here, but on the bottom where it says on the end of the table, you see you've got the first 3 columns represent your typical claims and lab data, which is what a health plan uses to identify patients that have diabetes or don't have diabetes. The second 3 columns are the integrated data with the claims and chart data along with the lab result data. What I want you to look at is the denominator in both of those, the 304 versus 529. Using 2 different sources, we identified 40% more diabetic patients when we integrated the data than when we didn't. Meaning that if we're just trying to find our diabetic patients using just claims data, we're missing about 40% of the patients that actually have diabetes. So if we're trying to make good decisions, we can't just use siloed data. Siloed data is good for descriptive analytics and telling us where to go, giving us the hot spots. But if you really want to get to evidence and help decide what to do, inform the physician, inform the patient, to improve that decision-making between the two, you've got to have the ability to pull both pieces together and beyond. This is just 2 sources of data. There are many more. The challenge we have in the U.S. healthcare system right now, as Brian pointed out very well, all the data are siloed. Health plans generally have a lot of claims data. A physician practice, if it's electronically enabled, will have a lot of electronic data, clinical data, but they only see at that practice. They often can't see what happened when they leave the practice or go to a specialist. If you go into a hospital, hospitals have tremendously rich data of what happens in the hospital. But what they struggle with is what happened before the patient came in and what happens when they leave. So when we're trying to do things like prevent readmissions into the hospital, that coordination of care is a really key part of that, and you can't tell that if you don't have all pieces pulled together. Pulling data together is essential. It's one of the most important things we can do in the U.S., and we're going to have a great discussion today, I think, not only in the presentation, but hopefully after we're talking about the great work that's going on at Indiana Health Information Exchange. So again, without getting too deep into this, I want to look at the sources of data that we're looking to get to get the richness from other data sources. This is giving an example of some of the things we can pull out of chart to add to the claims data that we have. And this particular graphic is representing the depth or the focus of what we're trying to achieve with real-world evidence, and that is that we're trying to take claims data, add into it both inpatient and outpatient data, sort of filling in those gaps, But it's also important for us to understand and have the ability to assess patient-reported outcomes, quality of life, patient satisfaction, productivity in the workplace. Those are also important components of this as well. So it's not just about the electronic component, it's actually actively involving the patient and the physician in the process of assessment. So won't go into a lot of more detail on this. A lot of this are in the slides, and we're happy to share those slides with you. But this is another good, important aspect of this, being able to add in vital signs to the work that we do with just claims data as well. My next favorite slide, and one of my last ones I'll talk about today, is actually this one, and that is that it's not good enough to just generate evidence. Because the challenge is if you really want to focus on that relationship at the bottom, you have to get the evidence into their hands. And it's exceptionally difficult. If we think publishing our results of our studies is going to change that bottom, then we're sadly mistaken. There's great evidence to say that that's truly the case. It takes more than a decade often to get evidence into regular practice. And the reason, one of the biggest contributors, is this. Think about everything that has to go on in a very narrow time space between that physician and that patient to make the best informed decisions. And if you look at all the things that they have to consider from the time the patient gets in to the time they leave, if you really wanted to process all the information and make the best decision, you would need hours to do it, especially on those complex patients. The reality is they have 15 minutes. So if we think we're going to publish a study and they're going to read that, and it now being one of 700,000 new publications that are published every single year, then the reality is that that's something that's a system that won't work. So we have to help them work through that, get the information through that, and that's decision support. And so it's not just about generating the evidence. We have to help get the information processed, put it in their hands at the time they need it, and from a source they trust and can understand how it applies to that patient. That's essential for this to all work. So won't go into detail. Some of this is actually in the slides, and I'm hoping you have copies of the slides. I don't know if that's for sure the case. They do. Yeah, okay, we'll distribute those. But there's 3 examples of the things that we're doing. One of our work we're doing in Delaware is around with Delaware Medicaid. They have the same issues, same concerns, same challenges, same desires. In this case, we're working with a different population, trying to understand how we can improve their decision-making, which is a passion of theirs as well. Dr. Cascione is going to talk about some of the work at Cleveland Clinic, so I will not talk about that. And the work we're doing with WestMed was represented by the slide I gave you before. Really, this is a very progressive specialty and primary care group practice just outside of New York City that is very, very, very committed to helping solve the problem of the 2 slides I talked about before, the cone of evidence and the funnel slide that they agree with in terms of being principles for their practice as well. So without further ado, I'm going to move this on, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker here. One of the consequences of getting old is you got to put your gear on. So Dr. Cascione, Dr. Joseph Cascione, is an interventional cardiologist in the Robert and Susan